Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Welcome to this edition of Industry Insights. Edwin, I believe we are up to now episode 63. So welcome Edwin back onto LinkedIn Live. Edwin Weijdema joining me from the Netherlands on our Veeam product strategy team. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Dave. Thanks for having me.
And Edwin's going to be our subject matter expert. We're going to do something a little unusual on this episode. We've got a lot of different ransomware themed streams that we've been doing between our Monday show and our Friday show. But Edwin, we did a poll a while back that's actually how we're going to organize what we're going to talk about in terms of some Veeam specifics and ability to remediate against ransomware. But, Edwin, we've heard all the stats, like 11 seconds, everyone's getting infected with ransomware. Last week, we hear about Razer mouse driver having an issue where literally your mouse can become a hijack threat. You discovered something this morning I thought was pretty interesting. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm working on a new story about the next wave of ransomware. And what I came across is there's a new way to deploy ransomware. What they do is they go into memory. They take like 16 bytes of data, for instance, a Word document that you open, and they encrypt it in memory. And they just let Word write it to disk. So it's just the same to the whole system, that is just an encrypted file. But it hasn't been encrypted by ransomware.
Wow. Yeah, the threatscape is certainly evolving. So want to give a shout out on a couple things housekeeping wise. One, please tell us where you're tuning in from. We'll go to a world map here. I'm in Colorado. We've got production teams in Georgia in the United States, as well as in Romania in Europe. And then where Edwin's located there, you can see as well. But love to hear where you're tuning in from. Also, feel free to ask a question, make a comment in the comment section on whichever platform you may be joining us from. And also, if you're watching on LinkedIn, we did go to roughly a month or so ago, closed captioning, but you can turn that off. Sometimes it's easiest to do that if you blow that up in the big screen. I believe it's the lower right-hand corner. You can turn that off. So let's jump into it. And we asked a poll. We had almost 250 people respond. And what we wanted to ask them is what ransomware capability associated with Veeam's product set would you most like to have covered in our live stream? And what we thought we would do is we'll just discuss these in stacked ranked order. I got to tell you, Edwin, I actually like a lot the one at the bottom, but I fully understand why the one at the top is at the top, because that's really about prevention, isn't it?
It sure is, Dave. Immutable backup repository. We have been working as Veeam for that for a long time to get that going, because we had to change some code, the way we do transport modes, how we operate in memory also. And people needed something to make those backups immutable, to fight off that ransomware, to make sure that it's not being altered, not being modified, or not being deleted. That's why immutable backup repository, and also it's a little bit of a hype, to be honest. We have seen immutable pop up on marketing all over the board, so that's also something we have to explain to people. And I think a lot of people voted for immutable backup repository to know more about what is it really, why should I use it. And if you look through the list, yeah, everything on that list is interesting and should be covered, but let's see how far we can go. But looking at immutability, I always have one saying if I go into a customer and try to explain that immutability, but immutability gives a false sense of security.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is immutability, one, isn't one specific thing. It can mean many things depending on how it's implemented, where it's implemented. And so Veeam has had a couple of different ways to offer immutability for some time now, actually dating back quite a ways. So we've had the ability to exploit AWS S3 object lock. Of course, that's on AWS, but we've got now about 24 different object storage suppliers that also honor the S3 object lock mechanism. And then there's other ways, whether it's on storage arrays or deduplication appliances that offer their own kind of either retention lock or some kind of safeguard snapshot mode. But what we introduced in version 11, tell us a little bit about that in terms of this specific concept.
Yeah, what you already said, Dave, we have this for a long time because I want to add one thing to your list, and that's tape. We're already
Yes.
doing tapes, and if you have that tape and you just flip off that piece of plastic that's in like the corner, it's immutable because you cannot override it. The system cannot override it. The tape streamer recognizes, okay, this tape should not be overwritten. Or you have ways to do write once, read many to create a warm device. Fast forward, version 10, object lock. So we could do in the capacity tier. So if you have a sober, we can do the capacity tier. You can use that and leverage that object lock already as immutability. And in version 11, we even go a step further. Why? We introduced the hardened repository. It's based on Linux. Why Linux? In Linux operating system, there's a flag called immutability or immutable. So as soon as you can set that flag, that file becomes immutable for X amount of time. That's also why we have rewritten some of our code to make sure that the transport mode and the processes in the different ways in Linux itself are separated. So to the normal process, the VBI just sends, I want for so many days this file to be immutable, and then the internal process that runs as root-like, so it's a high privilege one that's not accessible from the outside world. Make sure that all those files go through housekeeping, are being flagged. So the flag is being sent to the Linux operating system. Okay, this file should be flagged for these amount of days. And then we will just keep going on there. But that's for the first line of defense. So the first backup that comes in. And we hadn't had that before. We could write to a repository, but then you had to offload it, do a copy or move. Fortunately, we came also with a copy. So because if you do a move, then it's gone from the local. But if you can do a copy right away after the backup has been landed, then you can send it up to AWS, to Azure, or to any object storage cloud that's available that does use object lock. That makes it easier. But people were looking for a solution to have on-prem or the first line, the fast restores capability, the landing zone as it often also is called, and have those files as soon as they land, they are placed by Veeam backup replication that they are instantly immutable.
Yeah, and before we hit the map, because I'm told we've got an update, one of the things I particularly like about that, Edwin, meaning the immutable backup repository, is it doesn't presume proprietary hardware. We're still about flexibility. We're still about making sure that you can leverage the infrastructure of your choice. So let's hit the map now, because I think we've got a number of different countries. Well, Canada certainly jumps right out at you. It's great to see Canada. We've got California, Indiana. Also see that we've got some other European countries, Hungary, Switzerland, Sweden, France. Also see, definitely loved always to see Argentina in the house. If our colleague Jason Buffington were here, he would make a food comment for sure. If we look out at rest of the world, looks like we've got Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, and in Asia Pacific, we've got Vietnam as well. So thank you. And be sure, leave us a comment where you're tuning in from. When you do make the comment, definitely say your location, because the comment itself won't geolocate, won't tell us exactly where you're tuning in from. So thank you very much for that. But I liked what you mentioned at the outset, Edwin, meaning on the one hand, it's immutability is very helpful. It's very important. But on the other hand, and there is a other hand, take us through that. And I think we've got a slide that tees this up as well for you.
Yeah, immutability gives full sense of security. That's the discussion I have with a lot of customers and also partners out there. It's not the holy grail. It's not the silver bullet. And of all, it's not the solution for all your problems. Of course, it's an important part. If you're going to look at backups, then immutability should be part in the whole thing. But as a whole, immutability as it sits is not that holy grail. It's not your silver bullet. And if people can get that in their mind, okay, it should be part of my total strategy. So my protection strategy should have something of immutability maybe in it. So let's look into backups. If you look at the backups, if we can get the next slide, please. That will zoom a little bit into, okay, measures to protect your backup. Because that's what we are all about. That's also, if you look at our product, what we are doing. If you look at immutability, it's about the modification and deletion of data to prevent that. But it's just a small set of those. We also have data exfiltration, and we see that more and more that even if you have been hit by ransomware, you may be even not being encrypted, but they exfiltrate your data to make sure that that is that the data that they exfiltrate from you, make sure that you can you encrypt that. So the Veeam backup job, you can make sure that it encrypts the data. So even if they exfiltrate your data or your backup data, let me say it like that, then they cannot do anything with that. Another one that's popping up more, and that's also in the next wave of ransomware, is data injection. Instead of stealing data, they are giving you data. But that's a scary thing because that's about the data integrity. And if they inject data, and this is particularly about backups, if they inject it into your backup set, and then they do something harmful to your production data, then you cannot rely anymore on your backups. What should you do? And we have seen this in the news. There have been several victims through ransomware being encrypted or unlocked, or they could still operate their systems, but they could not trust their system. So if you have a production and you're delivering particular goods or services and you are not sure about the quality control, so the data integrity tied to that particular product or service, you have to shut down and to make sure that you can get back up to where you are and that you can trust your own data again. And then the last one, the insider threat. The more we see economic harm going around the world and uncertainty, you will see that the destruction of data. And that's also why you have to look at those measures, get them offline, get a particular location base. And we will zoom into that a little bit later on. And if you look at the data injection, I didn't pinpoint that one, but because of particular authentication schemes, make sure that you only have the least privileged. Who should access that? Who should have an availability or possibility to even inject data into that data set? And that's important to look at all those particular measures you could use to protect your data. And you should have all of those in place. Not just immutability, but all 5.
Yeah, and when you look at all five, obviously each one of these 5 are concerning their points of vulnerability. The data injection one probably worries me the most only because I oftentimes say at the point you go to your backup data, you've either lost or lost confidence in your production data. But now, if you're sifting away from production, going to your backup copy, and you don't have confidence in that version either, you really are in a lot of trouble. So it's very interesting there. You also started to tee up on some things that we'll get to when we talk about your white paper that you and Rick Vanover did, which is, your notion of least privilege and who can really access what. I mean, a lot of what is very important in securing your backup infrastructure and really protecting your entire company from cyber threats. I'll use the phrase digital hygiene, meaning it doesn't have anything to do with whatever backup product you're using entirely. It has to do with good best practices that ideally are taking place in your data center anyway, irrespective of your backup practice. But I do get asked, Edwin, sometimes, okay, what can Veeam do? And you've got great presentations on all the many things that Veeam can do from a technology perspective. I mean, they're like 50, 60 slides oftentimes. And I oftentimes say, well, if you can only do one thing, which is actually multiple things, but if there's only one slide, it's this next slide or the 3-2-1-1-0. And a lot of people have probably heard of 3-2-1. It's an interesting story because this concept of 3-2-1 actually originated in digital photography. And our colleague Rick Vanover actually reached out to the person recently, I think it was just maybe a month and a half ago, that first came up with this concept. But for those that may not be familiar with it, this means minimally 3 different copies of data. That's not a maximum, that's a minimum 3 copies of your data. 2 or more different types of media. That's to prevent any kind of dependency on specific infrastructure or microcode or even cables. Even at home, Edwin, I write to HDDs and I write to external SSDs, but they have little connector cables associated with them. So to mitigate against even that kind of an issue, I use technology that have different kind of connectivity. And then 1 or more copies should be off-site. In the past, we used to say this should be off-site to remediate against natural disasters or even man-made issues. United States right now, we're having a hurricane kind of situation hit part of the country. So that would have been a good example for that. But then we added on last year these extra 2 digits of an extra 1 and an extra 0. That 1 speaks to what you were describing, Edwin, about immutable storage of some kind or air gapped. So that could be something with some sort of lock or lack of privilege. To your point, it could be absolutely be physical tape. I happen to use ejected drives after Veeam backup completes every night. The drive is ejected from the file system. The volume manager can't see it, so therefore it can't be compromised overnight. And then the 0 is very important. This actually leverages our instant mount capability that we'll talk about in a little more detail. But that 0 is to do automated verification of your backup to ensure that you've got a good copy of your data. Because there's a bad joke, Edwin, in the backup industry that it's very hard to back up, or rather, it's very hard to restore that which you haven't backed up. And if you could add a little more phrases to that, it would be, it's very hard to successfully restore and resume if you've not successfully captured all of the data. So I know we've got a map hit coming here pretty soon. Why don't we go ahead and jump into that now, because I want to then tee it over to you you've got a great slide. So we've got, okay, let's see, we've added Mexico into the mix there. Then also we've got United Kingdom. We've also, let's see, you have South Africa, Liberia, India. So good portion of South America, 2 big countries there. Thank you, South Africa. And thank you, look at that, great APJ presence. Definitely appreciate all that. Keep those suggestions of where you're tuning in from, comments coming in, and any kind of questions that you may have. But Edwin, I want to turn it over to you. You've got a great slide. I could argue actually against my single slide that you've got a great single slide if there was only going to be 1 slide.
If there's only going to be 1 slide, then I use this particular slide. But it's like 3 slides in one. It's a bit tricky. So yeah, let's take it into the recipe against ransomware. That's the most common question I get. Okay, what can we do against ransomware? Dave, you explained the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. So that's one of the things that the chef should have. They should have some recipes in there. But you also need ingredients to create something. And that's where we put the immutable encryption, offline location, and authenticate directly beneath it. Those 2 things are needed to create a recipe against ransomware. But that are just what's on paper. You also need some physical things because you are going to store data. And that's where one of our colleagues and Mr. Ultra Resilient, Rick Vanover, he came up with that ultra resilient. And that's really resonating because you need ultra resilient backups. And you need devices for that. So those devices at the bottom, combined with those 2, the 3-2-1 rule and all measures against ransomware, so protecting your backup, if you combine that, you get that recipe against ransomware. That's on the left-hand corner. So you have, for instance, a hypervisor running. It's storing a backup. But what we do is we take a snapshot from our storage integrated device that's there. So if you are using storage that we can see and we can orchestrate, we can do a snapshot only job. That's also why you see the authenticate, but also a free there, because that's already 1 copy. We don't say that snapshot our backup, but it is a copy of your data and it's a snapshot in time. So really cool. Keep that one going. Then we go to the scale-up backup repository. We can do immutable backup as a hardened repository there. So you already get a 3, 2, and 1 there. Why? It's about the authentication schedule that's going on. And not just the authentication schedule, we also have some immutable there. And that's where immutable pops in, because those backup files cannot be modified or deleted. Then you can do a second immutable copy to, for instance, Amazon, Azure, on-prem storage devices like Object, like Cloudian, that have an object log available that we can leverage and we can also use and orchestrate. And then we go to the right-hand side, and what you could do is a third immutable option. So if you want to have the whole stream immutable, that's possible, because then we can go to AWS Archive. But that is just part of that 32110. We're missing one, and that's the 0. So from that server, we can do a sure backup, and making sure that those backups that are in there that are immutable are also recoverable. And because of that testing, we can make sure that those backups that are being done are completely 100% restorable. And if you have to restore, because it's not 100% failure proof, can always be some bad ingredient in there, and someone is coming through, messes with your kitchen there, and you have something that's like contamination in your production environment. So there's some ransomware going on, or there are some files deleted or encrypted. We can use from those backups, because we checked those backups and we made sure that they are 100% recoverable by sure backup, we can do an instant recovery. So you don't have to restore the whole environment because just a few files have been encrypted or deleted.
And just a quick comment, we had someone mention, I believe it was Peter on LinkedIn, said, Edwin, the thing with storage snapshots from the Veeam side of things is that it can be deleted easily. So, should that really be considered immutable? And from my vantage point, there are certain storage arrays that do offer immutability or ensure that you cannot remove some of the snapshots. Pure Storage is but one of many different examples, but one of our partners that facilitates that. So good point. Good shout out, Peter. It is a bit of a it depends situation. Edwin, maybe quickly take us through the next slide, and then we'll do one more map update, and then we'll start to close out.
So we're talking about ransomware, and ransomware is intrusive of your business. So we have to talk about business continuity. And if you're talking about business continuity, you're talking about disaster recovery. And that's where the recovery timeline comes in. So looking on the left side, you have the RPO. How much data can you lose? That's the RPO thing, data loss. If you look at the middle, it's about downtime. But there's always a reaction time. So before you start recovering, so from the moment you know that there's something going on to the moment that you are restoring, that's your RTO, recovery time objective. But the one that's more interesting to me, at least, is the maximum tolerable downtime. That's the MTD that's above it, because that's the reaction time, including the RTO. Those two together makes a maximum tolerable downtime. And that's for every organization different, of course. But it's also not for your whole infrastructure the same. It's about thinking which services should be back online fast. And we always take the example, for instance, for email systems. In the past, email systems where as soon as the email came in, it was like a process going through. But you didn't need to have the archive, but you needed the process to be online. So as soon as you could restore the email system, you were already back in business. And then later on, you could just add the archive to it.
Great point. Great point. And speaking of recovery, I want to just show people a quick screenshot from the Veeam Backup Replication Console. I appreciate there can be a lot of things that you see here, but Edwin, I'll break it down for you, and feel free to make additional comments. But really, recovery is a matter of 2 clicks. Select an object that you want to recover. It could be an entire SQL server. It could be an item from an application. And then select how you want it to be recovered, meaning we can restore it to one of the many clouds right now, Amazon or Azure, literally in just a few weeks. That'll be GCP as well, meaning Google. We can also do instant recovery, and Veeam pioneered this 11 years ago. So while immutable repository is great for trying to keep the threats out, in addition to all the many things you took us through, Edwin, if you do have to get back up and running, the ability to get instantly up and not necessarily have to require solid state drives to be able to do that, I think is really key. So let's hit the map one more time because we've actually got quite a few more countries that have come in. It looks like we've got in the United States, Ohio, but we've also in, let's see, we've got Slovenia, Netherlands, Portugal. We also, in the Middle East and Africa, we've got Ghana, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia is also, I see here. In APJ, Malaysia, Australia. I was remiss if I didn't mention Kenya as well. So super shout out for that. And as we start to wind up a little bit, I just want to give kind of a recap, maybe a little bit a new concept that we can introduce. We've been aligning a lot of our product management and strategy capabilities around something called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. NIST is just an acronym in the United States for National Institute of Standards and Technology. But it identifies 5 key areas, meaning identify, protect, detect, and respond and recover. And we're starting to align product capabilities according to each one of those. We've spoken about immutability, the 32110 rule. We also have the ability to offer secure restore, Edwin. Maybe just give us a 60-second discussion on what is secure restore actually doing.
Secure restore is making sure that if you have been hit by ransomware and everything is like burned down, you cannot trust anything in that production environment anymore. Then you have to go to a blank state. And to introduce your backups into the blank state, you want to make sure that you're not introducing that wildfire again. So you want to make sure that fire is out. So secure restore is doing a restore in a data lab and then tying in malware engines. So you can scan those files, make sure that what is going through is being stamped. Okay, this is clear, and push it through to production. And that's what secure restore is about.
Outstanding. And for more detail, I want to point you to a fantastic resource that Edwin and Rick Vanover have written. It's entitled 5 Ransomware Protection Best Practices. Now, don't let that number 5 fool you. This is like a 38-page document with a lot of detail going back to what I call digital hygiene. It talks not only about how to secure your Veeam environment, but best practices in any environment, irrespective of backup technologies. I believe we've got the URL in there in the various comment sections associated with that. And as we begin to look ahead this Friday, Anthony Spiteri and David Hill will be taking us through how and why to use AWS organizations. I actually had to look up, Edwin, what an AWS organization is, but it's a way to programmatically create AWS accounts and allocate resources, institute policy, and things of that like. Another quick shout out, this coming Monday, week from today, is the United States holiday, so we won't have a live stream. But after that, in the month of September, we're going to have a 3-week special with Jason Buffington and Melissa Palmer detailing disaster recovery in a multi-episode, 3-episode actually live stream. So with that, thank you so much, Edwin, for joining us. Thank you, everyone else, for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and look forward to seeing you on the next live stream. Bye for now.